Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this Radio Shop chat organized by Spectrum X, the NSF Spectrum Innovation Center. My name is Nick Lanneman. I'm professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm also serving as center director for Spectrum X. Before I hand things off to our MC and our speaker, I just want to mention a few things about this Radio Shop chat series. So if you could go to the next slide, Julie. Just for context, Spectrum X is a national center. It involves 30 universities, and it's really meant to create an academic hub in the radio spectrum ecosystem. We're about 150 researchers strong at this point and continuing to grow. And we've got a lot of activities going on. You can learn much more about us on our website. But that's the center that's organizing this series of presentations. If you could go to the next slide, Julie. The Radio Shop chats are really meant to be an opportunity to educate, debate, and spark collaborations in this really challenging, tricky field of radio spectrum management and innovation. It's typically a presentation or a panel discussion. In this case, today it'll be a presentation. Uh, we are trying to be co-elevating, not combative. So, constructive comments and so on. As you are aware, we deliver these via Zoom, and to the extent that the author and their organizations allow us to share the slides and the recording of the presentation, we do so. With that being said, the discussion, what's presented here, and the discussions around it are we operate under a modified Chatham House rule until we get that permission and we actually finally publish the presentation. So what that means is you're free to use the information that you get from this presentation, but neither the identity of the speaker or the affiliation of the speaker can be used until we publish the results. So with that being said, we can move on to the next slide, and I will hand things off to one more slide. I'll hand things off to John Chisholm, our MC for today. And before John gets started, Julie, go ahead and start the recording again. Thank you all.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks, Nick. And yeah, my name is Jonathan Chisholm. I am an associate professor in electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame alongside Nick. And it's my pleasure to MC this talk today. Bruce Levine is our speaker. Bruce is actually the program manager for an effort that I'm on. And so I've had the opportunity to get to know him over the last year and a half or so. And, I've learned a ton from him about what spectrum means to the Army. And it's really, I think he provides a lot of insight. He was actually on campus last fall, and just kind of through informal conversations, myself and Bert Hockwald found ourselves kind of learning a lot. And we thought, the voice, the DoD voice wasn't always as present as maybe it ought to be in these conversations. And so we really thought it'd be useful for this broader community to invite Bruce to come speak. And so he's been kind enough to accept the offer. Bruce is the team lead for the secure cellular effort within the network modernization project. And that is run out of the Program Executive Office, or PEO C3N, right? So this is the DoD acronyms. And so C3N stands for Command, Control, Communications, and Networking. And this is run out of Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Bruce is responsible for essentially Army network modernization in a secure sense. And this is no small task. Bruce has a bachelor's degree from Cornell, a master's from Johns Hopkins, and brings 30 years of commercial cellular experience to the DoD. So really, he has a lot of insight from both sides of the fence, if you will. And I think also not just from the commercial and the defense side, but also from the technology and the policy side. I know I've learned a lot from Bruce over the last year or so, and I hope that you do as well. Bruce has indicated that questions are welcome throughout. We ask that you please remain on mute and raise your hand, and I will be monitoring the participants list and I will look for a good opportunity to interrupt Bruce, and then at that time I'll ask you to unmute and ask your question. We'll try to save a little bit of time at the end for open question as well. So with that, Bruce Levine, please take it away.
All righty, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my slides. Start share. All right, let me know when you see that. Unfortunately, when I share the screen this way, I can't see anything, so I'm relying on John to actually step in and let me know when there are questions.
All right, Bruce, we are good to go with your presented slides.
Okay, outstanding. So this is an Army Spectrum process discussion. I've been told by my public affairs officials that I sort of have this little. The views expressed during this presentation are mine and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of the Army, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government as a whole. So just so that's clear. That said, I do work for the Department of Defense and Department of the Army, and so I'm sharing a little bit of what we've kind of run into from a policy standpoint and also in practice, like. How do we get permission to actually turn these radios and whatnot on? All right, so here's the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the general spectrum policy of the U.S. government, and then moving into more specifically Army spectrum policy, and then DoD spectrum certification process, and then really down into the weeds of how do we get permission to use these commercial networks. I am for most of my career, I've been a cellular telecommunications engineer, and so what I am essentially trying to do is figure out a way to get the Army to use cellular telecommunications systems, and so that everybody's kind of using them, but how do we get the soldiers to be able to use them safely, securely, wherever they end up going? And so now, sort of closing out the talk with how the Army is going to use cellular systems, and then, hey, what are some of the challenges that we have when we try to use them? All right, so U.S. government spectrum. Look, spectrum's owned. Every sovereign nation owns the spectrum over their borders, and we sort of define it all the way up to 3 terahertz, but it's only allocated currently in policy up to about 300 gigahertz. By the way, all of this information is publicly available. U.S. policy is sort of bifurcated. You've got the Federal Communications Commission, and that's sort of the left over here, and then the National Telecommunications, and I should know this off the top of my head, but NTIA. They manage the federal spectrum that is still owned and managed by the federal government. So FCC is more commercial. You can see that's been around for a little bit longer, since 1934. Whereas NTIA was really only spun out in 1978, and really, so we've got this the commercial world. So think cell phones, like radio, television, like anything essentially wireless, but also like the wired telephone. Various different bureaus and offices, split up to handle the various different services that are using electromagnetic spectrum. I sort of picked out of the various different bureaus the Office of Engineering and Technology, mainly because they are looking at kind of the new stuff that's going out, as we develop new services, new technologies. Like it's starting out in that Office of Engineering and Technology. They're also, interestingly, they have a consumer testing branch, and you're required to actually test consumer equipment to make sure it applies with all the rules, procedures and standards. Now, when we go to NTIA, they're really looking at the federal use of spectrum, and spectrum that's reserved for federal government use. So Army, Department of Homeland Security, like DoD, there are lots of systems that end up using that electromagnetic spectrum, and look, we don't want to put radars out there that are going to interfere with your cell phones. So the FCC and NTIA are trying to manage to make sure that everybody can do all the things that we want to end up doing. And again, these guys are kind of broken up, NTIA broken up into different offices that handle different aspects of policy and frequency use and coordination. So the key takeaway from this slide is really we've got the FCC and NTIA working hand in hand to manage all the spectrum. Some that's been allocated to commercial entities and some that remain within the federal government. All right, so hey, how does the Army end up using that? Well, our authority really flows from NTIA, and here we have National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Once we get into DoD, we start looking down into the services and different manual of regulations. So you have the Red Book for managing all federal radio frequency management, and that's really the top U.S. government policy document for how anything that touches electromagnetic spectrum gets used, and how does it get how do we use it? How do we manage it? Like that's kind of the overarching document. Moving down kind of into the Army, we've specifically got Army Regulation 5-12, the Army use of the electromagnetic spectrum. And that's really more Army specific policies. Every service is going to have a similar policy document, and they can vary from service to service. Right now, because I'm really a cellular telecommunications engineer at heart, I'm really looking at cellular telephone systems and how do we end up using them. And so this is pulled out of the Army Regulation 5-12, right? These systems are basically in non-government spectrum. So the spectrum manager can't just authorize the use of them. You really have to go through the FCC. And this gets to like an interesting and fundamental issue that the Army and DoD in general has with using these commercial services and commercial spectrum. We don't own this spectrum. But in order to have your cell phone or an Army cell phone access them, we have to get permission from the license holders. And those license holders are getting their license from the FCC. And so looking at NTIA, which is really governing, federal spectrum usage, there's this weird interconnection between FCC and NTIA. So NTIA basically says, hey, that's not ours to manage. FCC says, okay, yeah, that's ours to manage, but you're a government entity. Really, you should be talking to NTIA. And so there are some mechanisms that we have to try to actually get permission to turn on a system in like an FCC frequency or an FCC managed frequency. So we have to, you can kind of see Army activities must contract through an appropriate contract vehicle for access through FCC licensed holders. So, okay, if I want to buy some equipment that is going to end up, transmitting on that FCC frequency, I need a way to actually characterize that system. And so DoD instruction 4650-01, policies and procedures for management and use of the electromagnetic spectrum, actually, sort of spells out how you go about characterizing the spectrum that you're going to use. Now, keep in mind that policy was really written to manage the NTIA spectrum. So, you sort of everybody kind of comes together in a room, and by that I mean the component spectrum office reviews, like looking in the Interdepartmental Radio Advisory Committee under NTIA. You're looking at I want to use this spectrum for a particular use. Well, there are lots of other uses that the federal government may have used that particular frequency band. Does that use make sense? If we're already using that band for like a fire control radar, then it might not make sense to actually have it be used for a like a cell phone, because the power level from the radar is going to just totally swamp the um, the cell phone, right, and just sort of knock them off the air. So the various components of the committee basically try to decide, okay, how should this spectrum be used? Um, but really, at this point, I'm trying to use FCC frequencies that are outside the control of that NTIA managed spectrum. But I'm still statutorily required to actually, run this process when I'm buying equipment. So, all right, I want to characterize my system. I'm gonna gather the operating parameters of that system, and I fill out this DD form 1494 to actually, kind of spell out how this thing is going to, how this spectrum is going to be used, how this equipment is going to use it, and that's the full operating characteristics of the system: the receive power levels, the transmit power levels, like everything about that system to characterize it, and you submit it to this IRAC, the Spectrum Planning Subcommittee, and the Military Command Control Communications and Computers Executive Board, MC4EB, for review and comments. Now, if I'm looking at FCC, like an FCC managed piece of equipment, that SPS kind of looks at it, goes, well, does it fit with what the FCC has actually done? The way the FCC is characterized, how that frequency should be used. Is it within the sort of transmission masks, the receiver sensitivity, like all the characteristics? Yes, then okay, I'm going to approve that, but I'm going to issue a Joint Spectrum Office JF12 number. That's gonna I can now point to that number and pull up the operating characteristics of the equipment, and I can coordinate outside the U.S. Within the U.S., I'm still managing. I'm still using that FCC, the commercial system that. Sorry, let me take a minute to collect my thoughts. I'm still using the FCC and the FCC characterization to manage how I'm actually accessing that spectrum. So I know that was probably a very confusing high-level overview. But what I really want to do is talk to the license holder, and as the FCC sells off spectrum, the various different cell phone companies end up bidding on FCC spectrum, and they are the license holder over a geographic area. That license covers an entire geographic area of like a county, a city, and covers an entire area of a city, and I want to turn my system on in an area that isn't actually. I'm going to go into an area that isn't used, like. Yeah. Apologies. All right. Special temperate special. I'm trying to turn on a commercial system for the Army to be able to use cell phones that are using these using spectrum that's been allocated by the FCC. So I need to be able to coordinate with the license holder to actually get permission to actually turn this on. So my way to actually end up getting permission to turn these things on is to submit a request for special temporary authorization from this Office of Engineering Technology, the experimental licensing branch. Really, that's intended to allow for new technology. That if I need to use spectrum, I have a use, but there are existing licenses out there that are transmitting, but I have a new novel way to access spectrum or to get better service in some way. I need to experiment. So the experimental experimental licensing branch allows a way to get that new technology. So I essentially apply for that license, and it allows me to kind of turn on. But they want the grant of that license to be non-interfering with the existing commercial networks that are out there. So I submit a request. I'm using FCC managed frequencies for the Army and to keep soldiers connected, to let them use Army-based, like Army-owned cell phones. But and when I'm going out to use them, I'm going out to use them in places where they're doing training on military training reservations, training grounds. This is not in the middle of like New York City or like a major metropolitan area. They are out in the sticks where the commercial carriers, the mobile network operators, they are not actually providing service because the people aren't out there. But when the Army goes out there to train, they need to be able to turn them on, and so we apply for this special temporary authorization, and the mobile carriers who own the frequency over the entire area basically say, no, we're worried about interference, and we don't want to let you use it. So that special temporary authorization gives the license. There are special conditions that are in the license because they want this they want this to be a non-interfering test, really. So the devil of how do I get to turn this thing on, the devil's really in the details. And if you look, I've got the special conditions that are listed in this, and you can see requires consent of local advanced wireless service licensee to avoid interference, right? And then this particular special temporary authorization, I had two bands listed, and so there was another band. And that second special condition is basically don't interfere with that second band.
Bruce, we've got a couple of questions from the audience coming in on this
Oh,
topic.
Yeah.
Let me,
Yeah.
I think Edmund Humenberger, if you want to just unmute and voice your question.
Yeah, so I just want to rephrase what you try to say. Is like the Army wants to be a secondary user in a commercial band. And my question is, the commercial buyer of the frequency who licenses for commercial use usually has a contract condition how to use that frequency. And the question is the reselling and the relicensing even possible that the commercial user is relicensing or allowing to the Army to also use as a secondary user that spectrum?
Great question. So actually, and that's one of the that is one of the interesting things about the FCC. I can lease spectrum. It is explicitly allowed that entities can lease spectrum. When that license is issued, remember it's in terms of that mobile service, it's white space. So often the FCC, the Congress will say, "Hey, we're gonna reallocate spectrum." I know that it was this particular frequency band was used for, let's call it a TV, like a low power TV station. But we don't have a lot of low power TV stations we don't have a lot of stations transmitting around the U.S. So we repurpose it. The FCC says, all right, now this is going to be a mobile phone license. Okay, well, the TV station is going to have to turn off, and now that spectrum is essentially lying fallow until that whoever wins the license ends up turning on their system, right? And you're given a certain amount of time from when you win your license to, hey, guess what? I have to provide service, right? Now, interestingly, when the FCC first started licensing, cellular communication systems, you had to cover the entire area of your license. But does it make sense to cover the entire area? So if I've got a training range that's out there somewhere, that's sort of restricted use to military personnel. I'm never going to build a site on that restricted range because there really aren't any people there. I was traveling at one point, went to Muir Woods, and the cellular operators don't have service in Muir Woods. Why? It's national park or part of the National Park Service, and part of the beauty of the natural world is that I don't see cell towers like all over the place. So and while there are people like in that park, they're not there all the time, and the sort of sparse population. So for the mobile carriers, are they going to buy towers and equipment to service an area that doesn't actually have any people? And look, the mobile network operators horse trade all the time. Maybe their main focus is on the East Coast, and so their bread and butter, they need to beef up capacity in like New York City. So hey, guess what? AT&T and T-Mobile are going to swap some frequencies, and so AT&T will pick up 5 or 10 megahertz of spectrum in New York City, but they'll give up some out in LA because the T-Mobile folks, their spectrum position isn't ideal in LA. So they'll swap and move, and you can actually, it's sort of in the best interest of the mobile network operators. If they've got fallow spectrum, you can actually recover some money if you lease that unused spectrum to an entity that could use it, and that's explicitly allowed by the FCC. Now, remember I talked about sovereign nations. What's legal and proper in the United States may not be legal and proper when you go outside the U.S. And so, there's a real big question if I'm basing everything on I'm going to like have a lease of spectrum over a training area, and now I'm going to take this thing out and do some training in Germany when that Army unit is doing an exercise. Is it legal to actually lease spectrum in Germany or in India or Thailand or wherever we're going to do exercises? It may or may not be, and so really we have a problem. One of the problems that we end up having for Army use of these systems is I'm going to train with it, and I'm starting out in the U.S., but now I'm going to pick up and I'm going to get sent somewhere. Maybe the Royal Thai Army has invited us in to do an exercise, and so for a month or two, I'm going to have a couple of units that are working side by side with the Royal Thai Army. So how do I take that Army cellular system that I'm using in the U.S.? I've got a process for doing it, and I take it overseas. Well, really, at that point, that's where the JF-12 comes into play, because I characterize a system, I hand that over to the Thai government and the Spectrum Authority within the Thai government, and then they, in negotiation with the combatant commands, so the sort of higher headquarters that's sending the Army unit out to that training exercise, and the State Department, they sit down with the Thai Spectrum authorities and try to find a way that these Army communication systems, which are based on commercial systems, we can actually turn them on. depending on how much that foreign nation wants the U.S. Army out there. Maybe they turn off systems in a spectrum band that's not well utilized, like in a particular area. That's really up to that negotiation between the State Department and and the COCOMs and that sort of host nation that's doing the exercise. So that's probably a little bit more than just how we're using it. I would also kind of from a spectrum standpoint. My primary use is that mobile phone communication. So I'm still a primary user. I'm not really a secondary user when it comes to the actual use of the devices and the service. So I think, Jonathan, you said there were some other questions.
Yeah. So actually, that very last comment you just made, I think answered one of them. And thanks for clarifying that. So as I understand, you are a primary user using it as a cellular service, but the secondary use requires a temporary an STA, right?
Well, so that and that sort of starts getting into like the spectrum policy and sort of okay, like look, you have the International Telecommunications Union (ITU), you have these World Radio Conferences, World Radio Congress, right, where they're deciding, hey, this particular spectrum band should be like these 5 services. Primary might be, oh, I don't know, radio, radio space, telemetry, right? So I'm using a radio space telescope. That might be the primary use in that spectrum band. Now, there are going to be some others. They might be secondary uses, but really, and I highlight that space telescope, so radio telescope, because really often those things they require quiet, and we have a National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Green Banks, West Virginia, and written in the FCC, essentially administrative law. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, so I may be a little bit misprecise in the language that I use in describing this. But essentially, the FCC contains a quiet zone, and any RF radiation inside that quiet zone, which is 1 degree north, 1 degree south, 1 degree east, west, and 1 degree west. So it's a box around that National Radio Astronomy Observatory in West Virginia. Any use of RF radiation inside that box, you have to coordinate with the observatory, and they might tell you, no, I'm you've got a cellular license. It says you're allowed to transmit, and they're like, well, sure, you can transmit, but you want 100 watts ERP, effective radiated power? Nope, sorry, you're like line of sight right into my receiver for my big dish. And you're going to have to cut down that effective radiated power down to like 2 or 3 watts.
So actually, a question from Julius Knapp says, can you comment on what the Army would need to test in commercial wireless spectrum? Is it actually cell phones, checking for security provisions, or are these systems devices that have other applications?
Great question. So when I look at what the Army kind of wants to do, we want to take advantage of the tremendous power of these devices, and really, and that gets a little bit to the primary and secondary, tertiary uses within the FCC regulations and inside of ITU. I'm not looking to use cellular what the 3GPP standards bodies are defining as cellular frequency bands. I want to use the power of the devices and the ubiquitous connectivity. So just like you're using that phone when you leave the house, you pull up Google Maps and you give directions to wherever you're monitoring traffic. I want to take advantage of that ubiquitous network connectivity and the high data rates that I can get on these devices, but I want the soldiers to be able to use them, right? So I can't really talk about specific apps that the Army may or may not want to use, but at heart, we want to use that device in the way that the device was meant to be used. So I may want to look at video. Like, where's that video coming from? Well, it depends. But I like, if I'm a commercial person and I'm driving down the road, my wife is in the passenger seat and she's a little bored. Maybe she pulls up her favorite cat video and just watches a video. The soldiers are going to figure out a way to use this, but I want to take advantage of the power of the device to access data wherever it is. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I think so. And just a little bit more on it. Is it just the cell phone side, or how do you deal with the base station side, the network itself, when you're going into what might be unfriendly areas?
Yeah. So look, there are questions about like how safe and secure we can make these devices. That's really outside of the purview of this particular talk. But part of what we're trying to do as the Army is like, hey, we want to take advantage of the cell phone system. So look, I could buy as many cell phones. I could put a cell phone in every soldier's hands. But if I don't have a network behind it, and the network behind it is really the ecosystem of base stations, right? So, and I get a little bit into this in sort of, well, I get to it kind of on this slide here. Look, I want to be able to take advantage of these systems. The Army has said very clearly, if there's a network that's there now, I want to take advantage of it. Right now, what does that mean? So that means I have an Army cell phone. If there is a network that a mobile network operator has built, and I can trust it enough to use it, then I'm going to take a SIM card, I'm going to throw it in there, and I'm going to use their network, and then I don't have to worry about building my own network, right? But when I don't trust the network, or I go somewhere where there is no network, because let's be honest, there are places in the world where there's no network, I'm going to bring that cellular base station, and I'm going to transmit, right, and provide that cellular data capacity through a network that I own, and so I trust it because I'm the Army. I own it now. So, you can't divorce the cell phone from the base station. And I know there's some talk about non-terrestrial networks but again, that's a network that's there. Maybe DoD is going to put satellites up there. Maybe there's some capacity that I can access on my commercially available device. But Department of Defense can do some things working with the cell phone manufacturers. But really, the power of the device is in the billions and potentially trillions of dollars that the commercial entities have invested in the cell phones and in the base stations. And look, the research and development budget that we have within DoD is just dwarfed by what the commercial entities are doing. So we want to take advantage of that. And there was a time, sometime in the not so like far past, that the Department of Defense was the largest consumer of radio devices in the world. And if you wanted to build a radio, you pretty much had to come to like DoD. But like at its heart, that cell phone, that's a radio transmitter and receiver, and like the number of devices, and if I'm just buying commercial devices, but devices plus like tactical radios in general, the number of devices that DoD uses today when compared against just commercial cellular modems like IoT devices, just your Samsungs and Googles and Huawei's of the world that are that cell phone device. I'm a rounding error for the number of radio transmitters receivers compared to that commercial ecosystem.
So,
Thanks,
so there's
Chris.
another question that's come in from Nick Lanneman, and it's a little bit of a pivot, but somewhat similar, and that is related to the CBRS and maybe taking advantage of some of these efforts that are already ongoing with sharing. And the question is, does the CBRS model, private cellular, 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz band, offer a shorter path for your needs? My guess is that you would be able to deploy the equipment without having to get an STA, recognizing that this might only be useful in the US, but can you speak to the degree to which the DoD and the Army in particular is attempting to leverage these shared bands that are going on in the commercial space as well? And then are there any international equivalents to that, I guess maybe you could add?
Yeah, so great point. And this kind of gets to the sort of bifurcated nature of the FCC and NTIA, right? With NTIA being government and FCC being commercial. If you go outside the US and you look at the regulatory agencies like outside the US, they typically don't do that, right? So the government defines all of these things, and they're not going to two different agencies to sort of manage that spectrum. So CBRS, that's defined by the FCC, and it's only applicable inside the US. Now, there's some interesting aspects of CBRS. Look, when you start talking shared spectrum, Wi-Fi is great. That's shared spectrum, and I just turn on my device and it self-navigates. But they're going to put strict power limits on how much power I can actually transmit. I don't want a huge bubble of coverage from something that's using shared spectrum, because I want to reuse those frequencies like as much as possible. So there are regulatory limits on how much power I can actually transmit out of a CBRS device, and which are going to limit the effective range that I can get at, and it's only one frequency band, right? So one of the things when you start looking at the commercial ecosystem and what they're developing and what the military kind of wants to do, in some ways they walk the same path, and then in places they very sharply diverge, right? So that commercial ecosystem, they're not like, if I'm AT&T, I have defined frequencies that I can use. So I'm going to buy base stations that work in those frequencies, and I have zero interest as a commercial licensee with one frequency band. I have zero interest in having a base station that can transmit on other bands. That's just a risk for me if somebody fat fingers which frequency I'm going to transmit in, and now I'm interfering drastically with like somebody else's frequencies. So like the commercial guys and the commercial ecosystem don't want that software defined radio, but like, look, I don't own any of this spectrum as the Army, so I want to take advantage of whatever frequencies are not in use, and sort of in my ideal world, I listen for a little while, and it's like, yeah, okay, like of the, let's call it 40 GPP, 3 GPP, cellular frequencies, these 3 are not in use. Well, that's where I want to tune my base station. That's where I want my cell phones to end up tuning, because they both have to be in the same band in order to actually work. And so I'd like to be able to take advantage of any frequency that's out there. That's going to give me, and get, if I have a device that has that capability, and I characterize it in the JF12, then I go to my host nation when I go outside the US. Inside the US, I work the special temporary authorization. I get a lease, or I have a gentleman's agreement with the mobile network operator, that on this training range for this set of time, I'm going to be able to use it. I'm going to be able to use that base station and the cell phones frequency. But if I've characterized that software-defined radio such that I can now take it to the host nation, and I tell the host nation, listen, I can use band 1, I can use band 4, I can use band 60, I can use N77, and I'm just kind of throwing numbers out there right now. But the frequencies that correspond with each of those frequency bands, these are the 23 that I can pick from. Tell me which of those is available, and that gives them the flexibility to try to figure out, all right, like, you want to go to this particular area in Thailand? Yeah, my mobile network operators haven't actually fielded this particular frequency band, and now I just tune my radios to that frequency, and I'm off and running. So that kind of gets to this the software-defined radio aspect of that. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, thank you. So time check, we have about 10 minutes left. So I think this is a good open kind of Q&A. But if there's anything you want to do especially hit before then.
Yeah, so let me actually go to this slide. I'm trying to think. This is probably close to my last slide. Look quickly. Yeah. So this is sort of the last major slide. I kind of want to point out here that, like, look, in the U.S. we're dealing with NTIA and FCC. So there are interesting interplays in between, like, that spectrum manager and the spectrum manager for the military installation, and the level of approval that they have, and the sort of level of I don't know, power that they have for managing the spectrum that's over their installation. And the sort of first bullet there, if I've got government spectrum, it's not particularly valuable to the commercial guys until the commercial guys actually have access to it. And then from my standpoint, if I want the Army to take advantage of cell phones that can access that frequency, I need commercial industry to basically have access to that spectrum to make it useful. So while it's government owned, it's not particularly useful to me as a cellular guy trying to get cellular service, cellular technology in use by DoD. So I need the government spectrum to become not government, but I no longer have control over it once it's not government, right? Because the licensee owns the spectrum, and when I say, hey, can I use that? No, you can't. Moving to the sort of the last couple of bullets here, I've listed out the major cellular kind of spectrum rules. So this is the FCC, the Federal Register, the specific parts and when they were passed. So when the rules were formed, there may be updates, but this is when these services get sort of defined by the FCC, and you can start actually building networks, and customers can start using these. So 800 megahertz, that 1981, that is your original cell phone service, right? Those are the rules. 700 megahertz public safety systems, right? 2012. Broadband personal communication service, that's PCS. That happens around the 1990s, essentially, is when, so like, Sprint PCS, like AT&T starts using some of the spectrum in there is sort of PCS spectrum. Advanced wireless services, that comes a little bit later, 2002, with updates in 2012, 2014. Notice the last one there, Citizens Broadband Radio Service, and like when that comes about, right? 2015. CBRS is the only one that really explicitly says, hey, you need to share this spectrum. And what we hear from the commercial folks, the mobile network operators, like, hey, we need spectrum, we need spectrum, we need spectrum. We always want to sort of share the government spectrum. They see that as like greenfield space. And like looking at that first bullet, it absolutely is for them, but not, there are things that the military is using, things like radars, point-to-point, communication networks, all kinds of different technology that the military is currently using in systems that's on those frequencies. So, like while commercial wants to share with us, DoD would like to share with commercial, but I don't have there's no regulatory requirement for like the commercial mobile network operators to share spectrum with me. That's only explicitly defined in CBRS. All right, so with that, it's probably a great time for any other additional questions, and happy to take as much time as we need.
All right, very good. Thank you, Bruce. And we're open for questions. Let me suggest, we got a lot of questions coming in the chat. Let me just suggest that you raise your hand, and then I'll call on you and you can unmute. All right, Nick Lanneman.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. So a lot of what you described sounds similar to what happened in the public safety community some years ago. And, there was a lot of gyrations at the time. Like 10 years ago, this was, or it was a P25 was all the focus. And then it very quickly pivoted into the FirstNet. And just for context, are you familiar with FirstNet?
I am.
So for the audience's benefit, there was a band of spectrum that was available and sort of reserved and controlled by the public safety community. But there's a public-private partnership where FirstNet was created to give priority access to the public safety folks, but to deploy commercial networks to provide coverage and capacity. So is there an opportunity like that, maybe with some slight modifications, to try to solve some of these challenges to support both DoD and commercial in certain bands?
So is the question more, could we use FirstNet to try to get after?
No, it's really, my question is, I suppose you could try to use FirstNet, but is there a DoD net, a similar model inspired by FirstNet, but specific to DoD needs?
So I'm not aware of one. But I mean, I guess, let me ask a sort of following question. Would the idea be that DoD has a specific frequency band that is like a mobile cellular DoD frequency band? That would be kind of the FirstNet model. FirstNet was explicitly authorized.
Right, exactly.
10 megahertz of spectrum, like in a particular frequency band. So, I mean that is a solution. And like when we sort of get into safety, so when I say safety, there's some thought, and this is sort of my thought about, okay, all right, if I'm the Army, do I want a public land mobile network ID, a PLMN? Do I want one as the Army, or let's generalize? Do I want one as Department of Defense? Right. So if I do that, then I am saying, I, Department of Defense, am a network operator, and here is my network ID. So if I'm a bad guy, I just listen for the devices broadcasting and the base stations broadcasting that PLMN, and I target those. So there's a question like, do I want to have that? So if I allocate spectrum for DoD's use, that's going to be only cellular, that's sort of the easy button for I get to use it in the US, because guess what? I go to Thailand and like, that's not US government spectrum anymore. And the Thais may have decided that was a great TV station, and it doesn't matter that like I've got all these devices and all these networks and things that work in that particular frequency band. They're not going to compete with the megawatts of power that a TV station is going to do. My cellular network won't work.
Got a couple more questions here. Felipe Nazario Romero.
Yes, good afternoon. How you doing today, sir? First of all, Thank you for this opportunity of participating in this activity. I think it's a great opportunity to share information. First, I want to extend an invitation to communicate with us after all of this done. So we have questions from the Air Force side of the house just to share knowledge. I think it's a great opportunity to bring share, but my question is the following. There's a lot of talk, a lot of conversation about sharing the spectrum. However, after a study was done in at least in the US, the federal government, the DoD part of it, and all of those federal agencies, they are only using about less than 10% of the spectrum right now. Everything else belongs to the commercial side of the world. So saying that we need to share the little that we have and that we own in order for us to be able to move forward can be considered kind of a step back, because then we'd be losing some of the capabilities. And not only that, but the ability to test and be able to expand for new equipment. So I was wondering from your perspective, what can we do as a DoD or maybe as a federal agency to ensure that we keep that less than 10% of the spectrum in order for us to be able to use it? Over.
Yeah. So like to be very clear, I'm not advocating for DoD to sort of cough up more spectrum. I'm simply pointing out that the commercial guys, when they talk about sharing, they talk about, hey, we want to share that DoD spectrum. Like when you're not using it, we want to take advantage of being able to use it. And that sounds great, right? Like, I mean, we learn about sharing in kindergarten. But like, look, this last, highlighted bullet here, until the policy within these, federal regulations changes to sort of mandate sharing in these other frequency bands and these other services, then the wireless carriers can basically say, I don't need to share, right? Like, in fact, it doesn't say anything about sharing here. So, it's not really this spectrum position is not about, hey, DoD should give up more spectrum, we should share for sure. This is more, hey, like in the interest of sharing, let's really share the spectrum. And this spectrum, like, look, all of those different radio services have different frequencies that are allocated to them, and they propagate better. Some propagate better than others. There's more bandwidth in some than others. I'd like to be able to take advantage of the benefits of all of them. But like right now, if I say, hey, guess what? I'm going to go out on the training ranges of Fort Bliss. The license holder of 800 megahertz cellular spectrum basically says, nope, not gonna let you use it. Even though I can go out there with a spectrum analyzer, I can take their technical people out there and say, this is the area that I'm going to cover. This is how much service, this is how much signal I am not going to get to anywhere where you actually have people. These are closed military ranges in the desert. You got nobody here. Why are you telling me no?
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are at time, and we want to thank Bruce for being willing to answer so many questions. And Bruce, thanks for sharing your insight. And I believe that this recording may be available later for follow-up.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity. And, thanks for all the questions. Sorry for the little bit of a rough middle part of that.
Thanks again, Bruce. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Stay tuned for the next Radio Shop chat. For now, farewell.